Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Baker. I'm engineering manager at Motorspokes, and I'm happy to be part of this Motor Loop work stream. And I'm going to be reporting back on the bizops framework. We've got quite a few people from the community joining on and off in this presentation, but I'm going to get it going. So I thought we should start with a summary right at the beginning. What is the bizops framework? What I'm hoping to get right here is to summarize the whole of last PI's presentation on the bizops framework in one slide. I'm not sure if I'm going to do such a good job of it, but just bear with me. So what is the bizops framework? It's a structure that promotes the community collaboration in the journey that we're going on to building detailed experience APIs that capture best practice and operational practices to build really this model that we can use to roll out UX across hub operators. And the emphasis is this community collaboration. So there's three real pillars to this bizops framework. The first part of it is documentation. So what do we mean by documentation? These are documents, detailed documents illustrating or detailing the business operations processes that need to happen to get the jobs done for hub operators. We've got a collection of docs that we're going to be drawing from here, and we're trying to make them general and available to the community. On top of these documentations, we're going to be building an RBAC design, and I'm going to get Paul Macon to describe to you in detail later on about the RBAC design. It's more than RBAC stands for role-based access control, and we're not talking about just roles and permissions, although that is part of this design. It's not limited to that. It's much more detailed than that. It's talking about how do you design your processes and control points to mitigate risk within your organization. From there, what we're going to be doing is putting it on a community roadmap, and this essentially I'm hoping will become our to-do list of all the tasks that we want to do for hub operators. And the intention here is to show where work is being done, from which work stream it's being done, and to really coordinate the different work streams across the community to make sure that we're all working towards this common goal of trying to create a rich, useful experience for hub operators. So that community roadmap is a key part of that. Then next is the actual implementation of this framework, the technical implementation of that. So there we've got, well, this is the next part of the bizops framework. This sort of cornerstone is the actual technical implementation. So what that needs to happen there is it needs to be API-based RBAC using standardized identity access management tools. It needs to incorporate microfrontends, and it needs to facilitate the maker checker workflows, include detailed auditing, and we'll have some sort of plan around how it needs to be deployed. Details of that is really in previous convening presentation. So then all of this needs to fit within the referential architecture work stream. And then a big part of the output of this is also community engagement. We want this to be a workstream project that allows the community to collaborate. So we need developer guides, training materials, and templates. This is really the how to use the bizops framework. And why are we doing this? We're doing this for these reasons. We want this to be a get started quickly, set up core business processes for hub operator. We want it to be easy to customize parts of these if necessary, and then contribute them back into the community. And we need to follow best practice, especially around security. Okay, that's my summary. So let's look at the roadmap. So we're targeting, we've got two arrows where we are now and where we're targeting. We're not quite sure where we'll get to, but that's certainly where we're aiming for. So the first part of the stream, as outlined before, was the documents and RRAC design. This is going to involve report back to the product council. Then, and the next big part of the deliverable is building of the actual framework. You see, right, we've got in the middle here, the MVP. That's the part in which we unblock the rest of the community to start adding in parts directly into the bizops framework. And we obviously aiming to get that to that point as soon as possible. This will be done in collaboration with the design authority, and they need to vet and okay what is being put in place. So the first part, so we've chosen a vertical. When you're designing and building a framework, you need a good example to illustrate that's work and that works and showcase that functionality. So what we've done is we've chosen a participant lifecycle. And the first part of that, the onboarding part, to sort of use that example in building the framework. The main reason why we chose that is there seems to be a bit of a gap in the community. We don't have to stick with that, but at the moment it makes the most sense to do that. Then next part of this offering is going to be developer guides and training materials. It's obviously a key part because this is a community effort. And then community work streams. Now, I've highlighted right at the top there is the Myanmar MFI Digitisation project, and that's an exciting one because a lot of that effort going in there, we're hoping to incorporate as soon as possible into this bizops framework, and we'll be helping that team sort of translate that effort into this framework. So after we've achieved MVP, the next part of this is we're going to be engaging with that MFI Digitisation project to try and get them to start using the bizops framework. And we're going to use that exercise to validate that it in fact does meet the goals and that the process does work. And while we do that, we'll also be continuing with the effort to build out the participant lifecycle bounded context views into this business operations framework. Okay, next slide. So let's quickly jump into some detail. This is a diagram that was presented to the design authority, and essentially this is our current view of how we think it's going to work. At the bottom here in this diagram is the merge loop core, and then we've got the bounded contexts, operational APIs that exist in each of those bounded contexts sitting at this top level here, interacting with an experience layer that interacting with micro front ends that then plug into the portals that are made available. Now, the reason why I put this diagram up is I would like to, and that's not working, I would like to highlight this point, is that the user experience and so the experience layers, the micro front ends and the portals themselves are sitting above that line, which is separate to the sort of bounded context sitting inside the merge loop core of the operational API. And that means that we don't have to build these in sequence, we can actually interact and build these in parallel.
Paul, let me add one thing there, because you said there's a separation of bounded context. I think what we're trying to represent here is that every API in the system that's exposed by the system would have some consistent off proxy layer. That's those boxes represented by off proxy. The technology for that has to be selected based on a lot of criteria. What's a good fit for the system as it exists, plus what would work for the reference architecture, and what has the right trade-offs of functionality versus performance and whatnot. So this is showing that there's something that would be consistently applied across every set of APIs in the system, and some bounded context over there on the left side that is the central thing for that. And we do think there needs to be some distribution of responsibility for performance and whatnot. The other thing that we're showing here is that there's one whole stream of this, which is essentially UX and some sort of a UX framework calling into experience APIs. So that's the step at the top. Those experience APIs would call system APIs, and they would call back into whatever the actual core infrastructure is. And so what we have is then two streams that largely build out in parallel. One is establishing the core framework for how all this stuff works and establishing the patterns. And then the other is allowing UX to build, and we're really separated by that tier of experience API. So these things can go off on their own. They're not dependent on each other. That's it for that. Just want to make sure it was clear that these two things were decoupled, but the aim here was consistency. Oh, and then when you think about bounded context, we just talked about the reference architecture in the previous section. A bounded context would have a number of APIs that would be using this framework, and it could expose its own experience APIs. It could expose its own micro front ends. Where those things sit is completely, up for design. And I think a number of answers could exist. So across the top where you see a number of portals being described, some of those portals might exist inside existing bounded contexts, and there might be a good reason to make a new bounded context for one of them. So, this is not trying to design that yet. It's just trying to say, if we were going to do that, how would it work?
Great. Thanks, Brian, for talking it through. So next, I would like to showcase some of the Myanmar MFI digitization. So they've been on this journey to building the next version of the financial portal. And the reason why I think it's worth showcasing here is part of our plan is to make sure that this stuff is delivered into the bizops framework and available through the bizops framework. So here I've got a couple of screenshots. We've got the settlement view of the different settlement windows, and then a drill down into the participants' positions for each of the settlement windows. Then there's available details on the settlement transfers themselves, and then a way of inspecting how the position was got to by looking at the detailed transfers. So this is really a rich environment for display around deferred net settlement, and we intend to use this work stream to validate the fact that the BOF can incorporate work from different teams. So it's an exciting part of the project. Okay. Next, I want to just cover in a little bit more detail what we mean by those documentations that we're going to offer as part of this framework. So why are documents important? So a hub needs to perform certain actions and has certain jobs to be done. And to do that, they build a solution. And while implementing that solution, sometimes there are some real pain points. And then when you get those pain points, you evolve that solution to sort of accommodate or take into account those pain points to come up with a better solution. And there are three pillars to that solution. The one is the processes that sort of define that solution. Then you have the skilled people who work and implement the solution. And then the third pillar is the documents that detail those processes. And they are essentially these, you need to document it for knowledge transfer, but they essentially become the sustainable pillar of this real world solution that is out there being used. Now, and that's really what we're talking about, these documentations. They're the detailed documentations describing the solution. And the reason why it's important to make this available to the community is because it not only describes its solution, it also encapsulates the experience that we built up through the implementations of Moduloop at other places. So I'm going to give you a quick example of one of these documents. So defect triage. If we have a look here, I've listed some real pain points that are typical in when implementing or going live with a new deployment. And if you read down that list, I'm sure you can relate to some of them. So to address this problem, we came up with a defect triage process, a process that clearly identifies when it is a bug and when it isn't, provide an appropriate response to a level bug, and then if a bug has been identified, to be able to provide enough information with that bug so that it can be resolved and addressed later on in the process. So we have examples of that defect triage process that that will become part of this document trove that we're making available. So let's have a look at more the depth of what's being offered here. Financial monitoring, onboarding, settlement, DFSP management scheme, tech ops. It's really encompassing all aspects of hub operations. And what I'm trying to illustrate in this diagram is it's really an accumulation of a lot of years of experience, 50 plus man years of experience implementing real-time payment networks that we've encapsulated in these processes. And by making them available to the community in this way, we are hoping that the community can take these documents and are empowered to sort of evolve this experience as we go on to creating better and better solutions. It's a big thing. Okay, next I want to just touch on RBAC design, and Paul Macon, can you unmute and sort of talk around this topic a bit?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Paul. I'd just like to highlight that RBAC is not just about the tech, which, you know, it's not just about roles, it's not just about access control or anything like that. It's also about the people. And people who are active in this space talk about business processes and control points, which are the soft aspects of any RBAC implementation. So you identify control points to minimize the risk to your system, and you may implement those control points in RBAC through the assignment of tasks to people with specific roles, for example. So we are not in this process trying to just go straight for a tech implementation. We're also trying to develop the processes around this, how the RBAC implementation should be used, and helping to actually define it. So in the Myanmar implementation, we're taking this as an early opportunity to at least validate the approach being taken in the bizops framework. So we've been developing independent portals, and a few of those are listed here. We've got the participant lifecycle portal. We've got onboarding functionality, and from the finance portal itself, we've now actually split that into effectively two sub-portals, the settlement management and the liquidity management, which probably more properly fits within participant lifecycle. This has allowed us to start looking at the activities of a hub operator in terms of the roles that they need to take on, the controls around make a checker, for example, which so one person, usually a more junior person, makes a transaction and somebody else authorizes it, the checker, and splitting the activities, particularly around the finance portal, in that way. And we have produced a document at the moment which defines a set of roles which are currently being implemented in the Myanmar implementation, where Maker Checker is being used, and we've started documenting processes around that. It's not finalized yet. It hasn't been battle hardened. We know what we're trying to do, and we think we've got it right, but all rules change the minute anything goes live, so we'll see how it goes. But it has enabled us to demonstrate that the underlying approach of breaking everything down into roles and perhaps mapping roles across portals is definitely appropriate for the full range of envisaged portals in the whole bizops framework. So it's essentially allowed us in a in a live environment with a much more restricted set of portals to validate that the approach that we are taking in Myanmar can be extended into the bizops framework. But obviously that's work to be done in the future. But it's good to have that validation on at this early stage. As I've mentioned, we're already working with the hub operator, who I think is probably listening right now. We're starting to look at the development of business processes. We have a draft set of control points already, which focus on the roles that we've defined, and the processes will be built around those control points. So yeah, it's been a useful evaluation, if you like, in a real live working environment, which absolutely does focus the mind totally. We need to get this right. It's not theoretical in any way. So we'll continue to build on what we've been trying to do in Myanmar, and the idea being that we'll apply the lessons learned to develop a coherent approach. And part of that, an important element of that, is to maximizing the opportunity to identify not just commonalities and efficiencies, but where you're creating vulnerabilities through the use of roles, where activities on one particular portal can be used to subvert the activities on another portal if you get the roles wrong. So it's been a valuable lesson from that point of view. Paul, I'll just hand back to you, if I may.
Yes, thanks, Paul. I must say, before discussing this with you, I thought roles were just a list of roles and permissions associated with it, but I understand now it's a much more detailed and yet key part of the design. Okay, next I want to just talk through a community roadmap. Now, the community roadmap here, I've just got an example of what it could look like. We need to, as part of this work stream, work with the community product council in putting something like together. But there's a clear requirement that if we're going to involve the community to build a UX front end, that we have a list of all the work that needs to be done and a place defining who's doing what and when they expect it to be finished by. And that's what I mean by this community roadmap. Is sort of broken down in terms of bound of context of the functionality that we required, who's working on it, what's the status, where they are, just to allow us to work more closely together as a community. The nice thing about doing it this way is this also effectively becomes the to-do list of outstanding work that we're hoping to get completed for hub operator functionality. And that's an opportunity for community members to take from that to-do list and then add some work in and contribute that back to the community and help move this open source project, help make this open source project move forward. Okay, next, I would like to touch on the actual building of that framework and what it looks like. So the importance of micro frontends. This is maybe not as well understood by everyone, so I thought I'll just spell it out. What is a micro frontend? So a micro frontend is almost a slice out of your UI that is then controlled by a different piece of code. Now, why would you want to do that? And the reason is you decoupling your teams. You know, that piece of functionality has got their own backend experience APIs and backend operational APIs, and all of that sort of fits together and then plugs into this final deliverable. And by doing that decoupling, you're allowing the teams to become autonomous on their own, so that we don't have this sort of complicated collaboration when we try and do releases. Each team can independently work towards their own release cycles and upgrades and work independently. That is extremely empowering. But that's not the only benefit from having micro frontends. Micro frontends also allow the community to customize a piece by taking something there and then adding to it. And instead of rebuilding the whole UI, they're just adding to the part that's not there. Or they could replace it completely with another micro front end. Or Well, the final benefit is because it's well-defined and encapsulated, it allows them to easily and in a more structured way communicate or contribute effort back into the community. Next, I would like to look in a little more detail on the reference architecture. Some of this, I think, Brian covered earlier. So three things I want to highlight is there are three layers that we're illustrating here: operational APIs, experience layers, and micro frontends. And then on top of that, we need to add in our RBAC implementation following some best practice security. And this is our auth proxies sitting on both the experience layers and in operational APIs. We've got an adapter within the core module loop that's going to facilitate a lot of that. And I would also like to highlight this operational API or the bounded context part of this, and those are these vertical slices. So because the micro front ends may or may not sit within a bounded context, if they do, then you could think of them as associated with that bounded context, but certainly they don't need to be developed in line at the same time as the operational APIs. That can be done independently, but we do have that alignment up through that bounded context all the way through to the micro front end. James, do you think there's more that we need to talk about on this experience API?
No, I think we covered everything, Paul.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks, James. Just wanted to check. So I'm going to ask Sam to talk about this. He's been involved in the referential architecture stream to quite a bit of detail. Sam?
Thanks, Paul. Hello, everyone. So we talked about various bounded contexts and the reference architecture. Talked about bounded contexts such as participant lifecycle, settlement, reporting and auditing, authentication, authorization, and identity and access management bounded context. So how is business operations that we talked about so far related, or how does this relate with reference architecture? So this workstream or this initiative we're talking about aims to deliver designs and implementations across a number of bounded contexts, essentially implementing the experience layers for these bounded contexts. This complements the reference architecture in those areas. And we also want this to capture all the best practices and a good set of technologies that will develop a templatized approach, and which eventually will help in building a community roadmap. So this template, our goal is that this template can then be used for evolving future business operational efforts, and we'll set an exemplar framework for the rest of the business process so that we can have a complete product in the future with community collaboration. So it doesn't by itself want to comprehensively cover all the business process, because that is not practical, but the goal is to develop that templatized approach. Looking at the various artifacts, this involves business process flows, role-based access controls, developing them in collaboration with various subject matter experts and the product council, experience layer APIs that are self-explanatory, and exemplar micro frontends. In addition, we'll also adopt the definition of done as accepted and adopted in the Mojaloop community. To be clear, this doesn't replace the current infrastructure stack, Rancher, Helm for package management, Docker for containers, and server cluster management. So this is about the control architecture that purely deals with the Mojaloop application. And if you can go to the next slide, Paul. Because this involves more than one bounded context, we understand that there will be resources across several bounded contexts. And for conforming to the best practices, we know that all these operational APIs need to have some guidelines. For example, we want role-based access controls, not just at the external most point, but also built into the services, where we have token-based access and validation of authentication, authorization, stuff like that, and filtering built into the services. We talked about these APIs also conforming to the reference architecture bounded context and best practices laid down there. One thing Johanel also covered earlier is we want to unify some of the process into a single step registration instead of like 5 to 6 step process that we have now for onboarding FSPs. And we're also envisioning that the maker checker processes will be built in instead of applying at the periphery levels. This again will feed back into the reference architecture work stream, and I'll pass it on to Johanel to give us a little bit more detail about participant lifecycle and how it relates to business operations framework. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Sam.
Sam.
Thank you, Paul. Hi, everyone. So just taking into consideration everything that's being said up till this point, we would like to hype up, for lack of a better word, the participant lifecycle, to get everyone excited about what we would like to achieve with the bounded context, since we will be embarking our first journey with the participant lifecycle. And why did we choose it? And what do we want to achieve by doing it? So as Sam has mentioned, the maker checker procedures, it's and Paul and them also identified, the RBAC is an incredibly extensive thing. It extends further than roles and just being allowed to perform a certain action. And to allow a participant to be as fluid as that RBAC would allow it to be, there's a exciting new state management that we would like to introduce, which is allowing a participant to be modified, to be moved from one state to another. Now, what does that mean, to move a participant from a state? It's to allow different features and restrict also some capabilities. You don't want to, for example, if I'm the switch operator or the switch owner, to allow for all the features to be available for every single one of my clients. There's business models that need to be adhered to, pricing models, and marketing has to be done around all of these kind of things. So why do we not expose this to our clients and say, listen, we allow you to manipulate the permissions, the actions, the interactions that a participant could have by exposing a state management. And in simple terms, it's mostly a mechanism that controls the interactions that a given participant can have with the system. And these rules can be set up in the beginning with the bootstrapping phase of the environment, or you can adapt it a bit later on and make a few changes and switch a participant over from one state to another to restrict their access. And a basic example that I can quickly, off the top of my head, think of is, if we would like to, we could limit a participant amount of account lookups so that they don't go around and do account discovery and start bombarding the environment with 10 billion account lookup transactions. What we do is we say to this participant, listen, we've noticed you've been doing too many queries, so we're changing your state. We're limiting the amount of account lookup messages you send through. If you exceed it, all we're going to do is imply fees onto your account, or it gets handled bilaterally. But that is the exciting new management tool we can present, is the state management. And why the maker checker process, why the single step sign on? It is encompassed into the state management. The maker checker procedures is built into every single step of Mojo Loop for any write operation. If there's a few query and read operations that can take place, those don't necessarily need to have the maker checker process, but any other ones, we find it necessary, and that's why we decided to implement it. So in conclusion, I think the state management as a feature itself is exciting enough, but naturally it's not the only thing we are enhancing. We're doing the single step participant onboarding, which I'm also quite excited about myself, and looking forward to working on this. And thanks again for having me. Yeah.
Thanks, Johan. That's a great feedback. I too am excited about that state. Something you didn't quite stress, I think, enough is that a configurable state management. So your scheme can decide what the states are going to be, which is extremely flexible. And that ties directly into the RBAC control and permissions enforced at probably an API gateway level. So that's really a secure approach that is very exciting to be part of. Okay, let's move on. So in this slide, I thought I would emphasize the community involvement for this work stream. So we've broken down our tasks into 5 objectives. And each one of those objectives is involving the community to one or other extent. So the first one is going to the product council for roadmap and docs and process. The second one, design, is going to the design authority and interacting with them to make sure that our design is alignment and the community agrees with and things. We also intend to involve some other community members in the building of this framework to make sure that we do it right and we get that community involvement. And then lastly, the last 3 objectives is really about fine-tuning, hardening, taking that forward is definitely we interacting with community work streams, guys involved at the moment in delivering operations to hub operators. And we certainly going to actively build those assets into this bizops framework so that they are available to the community. And I put you and your company down in the bottom there. It's a bit corny, but we are very technical, so that's fine. That's an invitation to you and your company to join this. You would be in good company, and we certainly need more work in terms of this effort towards creating a well-defined, structured hub operational experience that's trying to meet those end goals of quick start, workable guide for hub operations. And something I didn't quite mention up front is the main reason for that is we believe it's going to help with onboarding, onboarding new people and adoption of merge loop in areas. If it's easier and this work and efforts required, it certainly will help move that forward. Okay, last slide I've got here, and this is to illustrate what we're going to do by the end of this work stream, and that we're planning on having this call for contributions. So there's 2 outputs. The first one is this, the documentations around the business process, detailing them in detail and providing this community work roadmap of what's being worked on and what isn't being worked on. And then we've got the work stream that's going to build out those training material on and really dictate how to do this implementation well to add to this community effort. And then we're calling out to everyone to come and collaborate and help build part of this UI in this micro front-end environment, working on those back-end APIs to fulfill this requirement. And it's an opportunity to contribute some code. Those are all my slides. Warren, would you like to just end off this presentation?
I am trying my video out. Let's see. Oh, yeah, it worked. I'm on new tech today, streaming. Yeah, thank you, Paul, and everybody else. Thank you, Nell and Sam, for covering off some of those areas. I'm hoping what everyone's seeing here is that there's a lot of, in the business operations work stream, cutting across lots of bounded context, but it's about giving a vertical slice, filling in some of the gaps into the reference architecture. So we have, we create that framework for taking things forward. a basis that as Paul was saying, we can help extending help extend the community by making it much easier for people to contribute in a sensible and consistent way. One point I just referring to in the chats here, somebody's Miller was saying about Rancher, Helm, Docker, things like that. Yeah, this is not about managing the infrastructure, which is in IAC kind of work streams. We could talk a bit about that in a different world, but this is looking at the business processes from the front end, from operating the platform. I think we've covered everything, but since we do have some time, are there any questions either on chat or otherwise, and we can maybe take them now?
There are, I believe if you have questions, the best place to put them would be in the chat on Puffable. So I'd encourage all the attendees, if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat on the session page on Puffable, and Warren and team, you can respond to them there.
Yeah, thanks.
Any closing thoughts, Warren or Paul?
No, I'm just hoping that during the next PI we see substantive change. Thank you very much to the Myanmar team, and yeah, we really are setting, trying to set a roadmap and a framework of how we go forward. So please, anybody who has any resources, any and those resources are not just about developers, guys. It's also about the product work. Our friends at Mawali, Kadidia, and Dorota have contributed a lot of the thinking. Stefan and Johan from Cybran have given a lot of thought into making sure we are capturing those business processes. So it's can be from product people, it can be assistance with testing, it can be assistance with actual development and implementation. So yeah, please, there's no contribution too small at this point.
Great. Thanks, Warren. Simeon, I think we finished.
Awesome. Thank you all for a great presentation. We have about 18 minutes to the next presentation. So I'd encourage you all, if you have any questions, just pop them in the session page on the chat. We will end the session now, and I encourage you all to join us at the top of the hour for the best practice National RTP ISO 200.022 messaging and the effect support within module deployed by Michael and Coyle. Thank you, everybody.